Mark Twain's Bedroom, a short story. Our hero arrives in a city torn by historical revisionism. Gigolo Forbes, his mother said that he was named after his father, came to Ballarat with the blue fidgets. He answered an advertisement in the Ballarat Advocate by a Mr. Thaddeus Thackeray, who had advised that he had a room of great merit for a suitable tenant. It was located in a big red rambling on Mayor Street, with rose gardens and wrought iron in peak colonial aplomb. Long autumn hemmed in the hills. The roads were slippery with acorns. It appeared to be a commodious abode. Forbes was, by constitution, historically inclined. He had heard of the Raw Rebellion and thought he would inquire. It was 38 years beforehand, but the city was rife with memorabilia and merchandisers. There was still a dribble of living memory. He soon discovered, however, that much of the city had descended into spurious testimony, and everywhere he asked, he received a different tale. He might have had the blue fidgets, but he was not a gullible man. Freelancing was his modus operandi to pen a piece for the National Enquirer and see it syndicated throughout the wide-splayed British Empire upon which the sun never set. People everywhere fretted and obsessed. The rebellion had hit a raw colonial nerve. But was it true that 30,000 brave souls had taken their lives that day rather than submit to the perfidy of the British Crown? Surely not. During his first 24 hours in Ballarat, he met a man who tried to tell him that Peter Layla's arm was still intact in an ice frame at the rear of the Cumberland Hotel. "Ask anyone," said the man. "Everyone knows where it is." Which man gave him directions to Thaddeus Thackeray. He was an older gentleman of portly robustitude, Thackeray, and dangled a fob watch and had a shock of rare hair doing unruly things. The house smelt of pipe tobacco and Earl Grey tea to almost uncouth proportions. Forbes was greeted at the front door and extended his hand. "Gigolo Forbes," he said formally. "Very pleased to meet you, Gigolo," said Thackeray. "Please, call me Forbes. Just Forbes," said Forbes. Forbes stepped in and the two imparted customary introductions. It was only after some idling small talk about the life cycle of Thrip, curse of the Rosarian, that the conversation turned to the room in question, for Forbes as yet had nowhere to be horizontal. He liked Ballarat. He liked the verandas and the awnings. He liked green mould lapidations and tidy stands of upright daffodils. "I'm sure you'll like its disposition," said Thackeray. The room was at the front, eastward turning. Thackeray presented as a man who loathed all things rustic. Though he dwelt at the southern ends of the earth, he had no intention of being dusty and familiar. He kept a civilised establishment, as had his father, and as had his grandfather afore. There were sepia snaps on the brown picture rail in the entry hall to prove it. The vacant room was off the passage to the right. A Turkish rug of rich red led the way. It was at this point, however, just as Mr. Thackeray assured Mr. Forbes that, it being a respectable house, he would not tolerate cavorting of any stripe, that he initially, and for the first time, referred to the aforementioned room as Mark Twain's bedroom. He was certain that Mark Twain's bedroom would prove salubrious to Mr. Forbes' purpose. On this initial occasion, Forbes ignored it, but when his host suggested it again, Forbes felt compelled to prod, and thereafter new renderings of history emerged. "What do you mean Mark Twain's bedroom? Wondered Forbes. The bedroom was large and sparse, featuring a somewhat majestic bedding and a cupboard, a desk and a chair. The wallpaper was floral without being at all French. Outside the window, hydrangea. What? Thackeray was surprised. Oh, he said, that's the room where Mark Twain stayed when he came to Ballarat and toured the Golden Rambles. I see, said Forbes. After that, there was always going to be a but. He timed it nicely. But, he said, I thought Mark Twain stayed at Craig's Hotel. Craig's was a premier establishment featuring the only billiards table within 300 miles. That's what it said in the brochures. Catholics, said Thackeray gravely. Catholics? I'm bound to ask you, Forbes, said the older man. He had been waiting for the occasion, where you stand on the official account of the stockade. You're not one of those mass suicide people, are you? Well, I was wondering, said Forbes sheepishly. Because it didn't happen, I can assure you. My grandfather knew what happened, and he showed Mark Twain what happened. The Catholics covered it up. Did they? Don't believe a thing you read about it, Forbes. Fabrications. Lies and fabrications. And papery. Then, as a selling point, he observed that tourists paid him real shillings to see Mark Twain's bedroom, and he was offering it to Forbes on a cut-rate fortnightly basis. It was only much later than this, years in fact, that Forbes discovered that there were no fewer than 6 Mark Twain bedrooms for viewing or rent in the old city environs, enough to constitute a small cottage industry. Ironically, Craig's Hotel wasn't one of them. But had not Mark Twain submitted a lukewarm and rubbery rendering of events with platitudes about democratic vigour? Freemasons, Thackeray explained. Of course. Then the host lifted his eyes. Can you feel it, Forbes? Can you feel it? Feel it? Mark Twain. I'm afraid no, I don't think I can, Mr. Thackeray. Thackeray was visibly disappointed. You're not a sensitive then? A sensitive? My wife Doris was a sensitive. He then pointed to the desk against the window wall. That's where we held the seances, he said. I see, said Forbes. I want you to see something, Forbes. Look at this. Thackeray indicated for Forbes to poke his eyes at the rickety bedstone. There. What does that say? It says, said Forbes, looking. It says, Mark Twain was here. Exactly, said Thackeray, satisfied. But anyone might have written that, said Forbes. In fact, sir, it looks like it's been scratched in there recently. Interesting, isn't it? Thackeray admitted, pondering the mystery. There was a long pause. Might it have been one of your guests, sir? Forbes suggested. Thackeray thought about this for a minute. Oh, there's an idea, he said. I hadn't thought of that. Forbes might have had the blue fidgets, but he was not beneath a lateral notion, and he regarded spiritualism as a bit like Dutch licorice. You realise, said Thackeray, that there are people in this town who insist the rebellion happened in 1855 and not 1854, as is normally attested. Is there? How can they say that? Because they know that very strange things happen in this town, sir, said the older and wiser of them. If you stay here long enough, you'll see. That's strange? Asked Forbes. You'd be surprised, said old Thackeray. He was intent on stirring enigmas. Somehow, Forbes didn't think Thackeray's bold attestations would move readers of the National Enquirer. So what did happen on that fateful day in 1854 or 1855? Surely the official account of mass harikari by fearless diggers in their smelly droves, impaled on bayonets and assorted farm implements, had been seared into the national psyche. Was not just this theme immortalised in Waltzing My Matilda by the banjo of the bushland, the suicide of the stubborn? Who climbed the cliffs of Gallipoli Cove thinking otherwise? According to the official history, the blood of the martyrs stained the earth indelible, marked to this day by a splendid design of petunia beds in the car park of Sovereign Hill, the exact spot we know where flew the rebel ensign. There were harrowing tales of diggers, some as young as 12 from Latvia, disemboweling their best friends rather than paying £1 a month for a mining licence. There are some who think that suicidal is merely metaphorical, Thackeray advised, inasmuch as the stockade, a paltry affair in this account, was suicidal from the outset, a doomed folly, and the rest, they say, is a myth. Forbes agreed that this was ridiculous. Mark Twain wasn't buying it either. Regardless of what he might have put into print, Thackeray asserted, Twain was as sceptical of the stockade as he was of Shakespeare. He was the man who brought slang to journalistic speculation. Thackeray's grandfather said he was brash but astute. Thackeray's wife said his spirit body pined for the wide plains of Missouri. The question was, could Forbes sleep well in a bed where had slept such a man? It was only 30 shillings a fortnight, and was a gentle perambulation to the new railway station, splendid and white. Before deciding, Thackeray, the potential landlord, felt compelled to advise young Forbes further that the man immediately next door was a scoundrel who claimed to be selling pieces of Carboni's Southern Cross to tourists in 1-inch squares, and at last estimation had sold portions of a flag the size of the Eastern Oval. Personally, Thackeray regarded relics as papus hocus pocus, pure and simple, reinforcing, he thought, the logocentric bias of episcopal tyranny. Are there any ghosts? Wondered Forbes at this point. Sane people in Melbourne had told him that Ballarat was a haunted gully. "Oh, it doesn't matter," said Thackeray. "You're not a sensitive. You won't see them." His hair continued to be unruly. Is there any truth, wondered Forbes then, in the story that the rebellion was hijacked by the Irish for the cause of Vinegar Hill? Thackeray just looked at him and said nothing. It didn't even deserve a reply. "I see," said Forbes after a while. A man in Sebastopol, suspected of anti-Semitism, once claimed that the entire story of the mass suicide, just as the constabulary breached the wall, was the story of Masada superimposed into an Antipodean context. People vandalised his letterbox. A denizen of Soldiers Hill, who had studied the matter for a decade, claimed that nobody shot first, but that, in fact, both sides shot at exactly the same time and missed. So they called it a draw and started again. Some people claimed the Italians were hot-blooded. Some said Bentley's hotel burned itself down, spontaneously combusting from wickedness. Then there was the celebrity historian and sheep farmer Bob Tickler, who claimed that the entire rebellion actually happened in Creswick, a theory based on star alignments and creative cartography. No one would describe Twain as an altogether sober man, but according to Thackeray's grandfather, he was about as sensible as an American can get. He did buy a few souvenirs and knickknacks before he left, a rebel tea towel for his aunt in Cincinnati, but otherwise remained suitably aloof from the muddy hoopla. It was a good model for Forbes to follow. How long did Twain stay? Forbes wanted to know. "Oh, years," said Thackeray. "Years?" "Yes." There was a long and involved halt in mutual registration. Forbes was building up to another but. Then Thackeray understood. "Oh, you mean in this life? Well, only 3 weeks. But long enough to be thoroughly schooled in the true story of the stockade." He knew. He knew what? He knew the flies were bad in Bendigo. He knew the coach up from Bacchus Marsh breached bold terrain. He knew there had been rumours of a ragged insurrection all along the foggy creek beds. He knew people said ugly things about Chinamen. But if a veritable blancmange of ethnic bravehearts did not march up to Eureka to hurl themselves onto pointy sticks for a good cause, then what in tarnation happened? How could the historians be so vapid? How could the truth be so pale? Why did Huck and Jim stop in at Aunt Polly's on their way down the massive Mississippi? Thaddeus Thackeray, unduly proud, was confident in the family doctrine. It was buttressed by his Presbyterian faith in predestination, a pressing topic on the goldfields. As Forbes discovered, families and clans took sides. The Gordons and the Hanrahans favoured undue provocation. The Carls and Germans in general said that the rebels were loose-fitting anyway, and the massacre conformed to Mr. Darwin's new theory of natural selection. Families from Ulster all claimed there was a Union Jack involved. The O'Briens weren't impressed. They claimed the whole rebellion was a misunderstanding caused by funny Welsh accents. The inner workings of the city were truly laid bare when from time to time wives or daughters of assorted families would start brawling and scratching and pulling hair over some matter of stockade chronology in the dairy aisles of the Golden Point General Store. Often it would spill out onto the street, petticoats and bodices notwithstanding. It became such a regular and popular occurrence that local bookmakers started running a tote. Forbes had to ask, "Is it really Peter Layla's arm in an ice frame at the back of the Cumberland Hotel?" Thackeray looked at him. "Well, if it's not Peter Layla's arm, whose is it?" he said. Did he believe in the myth of the secret signals being relayed from Black Hill? He said Twain had walked up there and reported that there was a nice view on a clear day, and that it was therefore feasible, and the myth might be developed from a distant folk memory of actual events. The prevailing view, of course, was that it was a chance reflection of metal lids that Irishmen in the stockade mistranslated as an expletive in Gaelic. It frayed the tensions, it extended muscles, it gave them beetroot faces. Controversially, Professor of History Geoffrey Bingham gave a flowery speech directly under Minerva in the Mechanics' Hall, making parallels between hypothetical and inaccessible seams of gold in wondrous lustre and the equally elusive seams of truth. He used the phrase, "rich veins of pure conjecture." There was no conjecturing that somebody had scratched "Mark Twain was here" in the woodwork, though, and in the absence of visible ghosts, Forbes took the room. Ectoplasm might be true after all, but he trusted that he was too thick to be affected. He contemplated the diversity of eyewitness accounts. Somebody said they saw somebody open an umbrella on the grassy knoll. There was an angle. Readers of the National Enquirer would go for that. The only thing for the blue fidgets, he found, is cool climate adventure and a jaunt into the contentious perils of historical conflict. Ballarat was just the place. Gigolo Forbes therefore walked out satisfied from the red rambling on Mayor Street, and perhaps was not entirely insensitive to the American pen name in the ether. When he was a young gigolo, he had modelled himself upon Tom Sawyer, but the wide divide of undercurrents racked the city's graceful exterior. It was never Prussian blue, said some, of the rebel flag. It was more aqua with a bit of duck egg feel to it. The Prussians can go to hell. It made for febrile editorials, even decades post the event. Forbes' satisfaction was born of an optimistic outlook overall. He believed in machines, big ones. The 20th century would surely be a miracle of peace and prosperity unsurpassed. There would be no wars for the boys of Ballarat to die in. There would be a lot of railway lines, and men would overcome their squabbles and settle on a pallid compromise for the sake of the social fabric. He thought John Stuart Mill was hot sauce. Walking down Pleasant Street one day, he realised he could have been horizontal in the bedroom of Lola Montez, reputedly. You can bathe in her brass sturdy for an extra shilling. The bishops of the diocese, ecumenically, once took an unprecedented public stand against the spurious relic trade of Lola's frilly knickers. Forbes was content to find himself in a town where opportunity arm-wrestled conviction in a quaint bluestone equilibrium. But he was sceptical of unnecessary heroics. So were the good readers of the National Enquirer. They liked clear-cut battles where lots of people died and then had monuments built to them in civic rectitude. In this case, it was a flop. There was a flimsy battlement and the soldiers took potshots. But the ramifications for nascent democracy could be felt all the way to the spicy plains of the Punjab. The thought of gold prospectors getting the vote would give anyone the blue fidgets. They'd be letting women vote next. But Forbes rested in the certain knowledge that Ballarat is, after all, a long way from anywhere substantial, and that the cult of easy opinion, where every man owns a different version of events, was never likely to infect the wider world.